Now we get some of those financial reform issues. Obama's proposed some reform. We'll get to that in a little bit. But we want to talk to a guest on this. Les Leopold is the author of The Looting of America, How Wall Street's Game of Fantasy Finance Destroyed Our Jobs, Pensions, and Prosperity, and What We Can Do About It. Les, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem. You wrote recently about Geithnergate, and you have an interesting proposal in that regard. But first, let's understand what Geithnergate is. What is it, Les?
Well, there's a lot of heat on Geithner right now because he presided over some almost nefarious transactions. He was encouraging AIG to not divulge the fact that it was paying out these enormous credit default swap contracts to Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, Chase, and others. In other words, this was money, bailout money that was going from the government to AIG, the large insurance company, and then they were taking our bailout money and given, for example, $12.9 billion, not million, billion dollars to Goldman Sachs. So Geithner was trying to hush that up, and now that's being exposed, and everybody wants to, Geithner's head on a platter. But what I'm trying to do is say, okay, so what? What about the money? How do we get the money back? That's the part that we have to work on because, Geithner's easily replaced. They can find another Wall Street person who's going to do, be friendly to the interests of the banking community. That's easily done. There's thousands of them. But how do you get the money back? That $12.9 billion should not have gone to Goldman Sachs. It's our money.
Okay, so how would you do it, Les? How would you get the money back?
Well, it's easy. You just set up a windfall profit tax right across the board on Wall Street, saying, look, let's have an honest appraisal of how much damage has been done to the economy due to banking excesses, the large banks' excesses over the last 4 or 5 years. If you total it up, it probably comes to $10 trillion, $7 trillion, some enormous amount of money.
Can I stop you there for a second? Where do you get that number from?
Well, how much money has been? Okay, this is not a normal recession, right? This is a financial crash. So how much money is lost in the economy? Money that would have been earned that's not being earned. How much money was lost by the unemployed? The roughly 28 million or so people that don't have work right now. Let's say just limited to the 10 million people that have lost their jobs since the recession started. What about adding those losses? How about the money that we've provided the banking community, not just in terms of TARP, but all these other liquidity programs that come to many $trillion. There's a website that Nomi Prinz has that totals it up to over $12 trillion in programs that between the Fed and the Treasury have put forward. So you have this how about the deficit, the mounting deficit that's taking place because of the tax revenues that aren't coming in? What about all the crises in the state governments that are going on around the country?
All right. Well, look, here's the thing. Now, you could spend $12 trillion, but that doesn't mean that it's all out the window and it's not coming back. Some of the money does come back, whether it's TARP, et cetera.
And eventually all the unemployed people will, hopefully will get their lives back together. But there's a gaping hole in there. And my only point is this: while there's a gaping hole, it's unconscionable to let the banking community have record profits. How do you allow that to happen? How can they have record profits during the worst financial year since the Great Depression?
And I think anyone who can't see that they simply took our money and called it record profits doesn't want to look, okay? Doesn't, for whatever reason, wants to be blind to that fact. Because, look, you're not going to get the $12 trillion back, but you make a great point about Goldman Sachs and the backdoor bailout that they got from AIG. Tell us what they would have gotten if there was no backdoor bailout, what they got instead, and what the difference there is.
Okay, here's how the game was played. Goldman Sachs had a pile of what we now call toxic assets. These weren't just pools of subprime mortgages. These were bets upon bets on top of those mortgages, leveraged pools of those mortgages. And those securities, collateralized debt obligations, synthetic collateralized debt obligations, CDO squared, cubed, those things were really risky. So Goldman Sachs went to AIG and bought insurance. Now, you can't call it insurance because if it was real insurance, AIG would have to put up reserves. So they call these things, these insurance policies, credit default swaps. What you're doing is you're insuring those junk securities against default. So Goldman Sachs had $12.9 billion of that insurance. Well, AIG had gotten into that business big time because they didn't have to put anything up. So they insured like $450 billion worth of this junk debt all over the world, thinking, hey, it can't all go south at the same time, can it? Well, it did. They didn't have the money to cover the bets, so they would have gone bankrupt. Had they gone bankrupt, there was no market whatsoever for these kinds of assets. They might have gotten 20 cents on the dollar. So Goldman Sachs might have gotten, 2-point-something billion from a bankruptcy court, maybe. But instead what happened was AIG got bailed out by us, and they paid off their bets 100 cents on a dollar. Now, that is amazing, and that's what Geithner didn't want to let get out because he knew it would be, once people figured it out, it would be very controversial. But imagine that. They allowed – so think about this from a gambling perspective. Goldman Sachs made two bets. The first bet was on these risky securities, which gave them very high returns, gave them all kinds of money when they created them, bought, sold them. And it's in my book, The Looting of America, I kind of explain, take people step by step how these things work. They're really actually amazing. But they had to insure them. So they made a bet that the things were going to work. Then they made a second bet that when they insured them, AIG could pay off the insurance, right? AIG is just another company. So they're betting on the solvency of that company. They lost both bets. And what are the consequences from losing the bet? Nothing. They're suffering no consequences. One of the largest banks ever in the history of the world is going to suffer no consequences from playing the capitalist game and losing twice. So that's the part that just blows my mind that we're going to let that happen. So we should tax away 90% of their profit, period, right across the board.
Now, that's an interesting idea. Now, the Obama administration, of course, rejects that. How dare you even propose that? Even though they're the ones that shoveled the money over to them, or at least Geithner did during the Bush administration when he was the head of the New York Fed. So according to your calculations, and I think this makes a lot of sense, Goldman Sachs got about an extra $10.32 billion than they would have if they just sold what they had with the deal they had with AIG on the open market. They would have gotten about 20 cents on the dollar, according to the people who we had investigated. Okay, so they make an extra $10 billion, and look at that. Their bonuses for this year are estimated to be about $23 billion. So now, what Obama is proposing instead is a fee, a bailout fee on the banks. Now, what the banks say in the Wall Street article, Les, is they say, well, we're just going to pass that on to our customers. So who cares? You don't do it because you're just going to hurt the customers, and that's a usual way that they threaten people. But why would we? But they have a decent point. Why would we let them pass that on to their customers? Why not just take their bonuses that they got directly from the United States taxpayers? Wouldn't that be a much more efficient way of doing it?
Well, it's the only way to do it. We have to start creating disincentives on Wall Street for the kind of accumulation that's going on here. I mean, it's so crazy that we're kind of in this Alice in Wonderland looking glass world, and we can't even see how crazy it is. Think about this. These guys and gals, a couple of gals, that trade these profits, these securities every day are making these wild profits. There's even Paul Volcker says there's nothing, no evidence that we have from a credible source that says any of this activity is economically worthwhile for our economy. So that means it's a gambling outfit. They're gambling. Okay. They make sums by doing this that pay these people 100 times what the best neurosurgeon in the country gets. Now, and it's not even a free market. First, it's becoming an oligopoly. There's only 19 firms, and they control 65% of all the banking deposits in the country. They get to, shovel around our various subsidies. They don't have to suffer the losses when they lose because they're too big to fail. And we're letting them pay themselves 100 times what a neurosurgeon gets? That's crazy. I mean, somebody came from Mars saying, "Are you nuts? These are the values of your country? You're letting these people make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars while you have all these people unemployed, what are you drinking or smoking?
And it's not just that we let them, it's that we're giving them the taxpayer money to do it. That's the worst part. And Les, we're running out of time here, and I just want to get to one other thing that you mentioned. The $450 billion worth of insurance that AIG gave out that they had no way of paying for. Explain to people why they have the economic incentive, the executives that work at AIG, in the short term, to give out all those bets that they know there's no way in the world they can pay off.
Well, think about it as an insurance policy, but you don't have to back it up. So the more insurance they sold, the more fees they got from selling it, plus they got a sort of quarterly fee from each of these policies. So the more they let out, the more money they got in, and that was free money. The executives were going nuts over that. They were paying out enormous bonuses at AIG, and it was coming from this scam. Hey, let's let out more and more of these insurance policies all over the globe. We're a big outfit. As long as we're AAA rated, no one's going to ask for collateral from us. That was the deal of most of these insurance policies. So they backed it up with a piece of paper that said they were AAA rated. So it was like free money coming in.
It's free money for the executives, and then when they crash, it's not their money they lost.
It's our money.
It's our money. And how much did we funnel into AIG of taxpayer money?
I think we're up to $180 billion right now. 12.9 of which went over to Goldman Sachs. I mean, this has just got to change. I do think we're having some impact. The American public is getting really angry. That's why Obama's actually even thinking about this banking tax. Of course, the bankers are going to resist. It's going to be very fascinating tomorrow at these financial crisis inquiry commission hearings that are going to take place in Washington, because that's hopefully these very same people from Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan are going to be testifying under oath. So it'll be interesting to see what they say.
All right. Les Leopold is the author of The Looting of America. Thank you so much for joining us on
thanks so much for having me.
Watch more clips at theyoungturks.com.